Hey everybody, we are back. We have moved north from Prospect Hill to the area most synonymous with the Battle of Fredericksburg. We're here behind the stone wall at Marye's Heights. So this is where really where most people think of the Battle of Fredericksburg. They're thinking about what is going to be taking place just down from this stone wall. We are behind Confederate lines here. This recreated stone wall shows where the Confederate soldiers were defending Marye's Heights, as Union soldiers are going to be coming from downtown Fredericksburg, which is off in that direction, and moving up and trying to assault and take this position. So we're here with Kendrick Gibbs from Keystoners in Union Blue. He's going to talk about one of the Pennsylvania regiments that is going to be involved in this assault, one that is I feel like we both have a pretty strong personal connection to, the 127th Pennsylvania, known as the Dauphin County Regiment. And so Kendrick's going to talk a little bit about their experience during this battle, a little bit about their monument as well. We'll kind of discuss, you know, what this means to this particular regiment assaulting here. So Kendrick, I'll let you kind of take over.
All right, thank you. So we're now standing in like the Sunken Road area. The Innes House is to my right. And this is about the position the 127th is going to attack on December the 13th. But we're going to back up for a minute and talk a little bit about the 127th, because they're part of a unique section of regiments in the Union Army, the Army of the Potomac. They are 9-month regiments, and Jake's going to talk about another one of those right after this live stream that are really close in relation, really. But the 127th Pennsylvania was established in the late summer of 1862, but it takes a while for them to get organized. And they're founded by, or commanded by Colonel William W. Jennings. And this is another connection that we're going to have to the 129th that Jake's going to talk about, is that both of the commanders of these 9-month regiments will also be commanding emergency militias in the Gettysburg campaign. So Jennings has the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Militia. For any Gettysburg College people out here that might be watching, you know exactly who I'm talking about with that regiment, because they have the college company. But he will have them in June of 1863. Now, the regiment was raised actually in the month of August 1862, recruited from Adams, Schuylkill, Lebanon, and mostly from Dauphin counties. But the Adams County connection is why I'm interested in the regiment, because I had two uncles that were in the regiment, Albert and Eli Lentz. One of them is buried right over the hill here in the cemetery. He died after the battle, but before the second Battle of Fredericksburg in May. And the other one is buried back in York County, which is actually where they're from. And he's also named on the GAR monument in Gettysburg, which is pretty cool. So after forming the 127th Pennsylvania, they're sent to the defenses of Washington for a couple weeks. And then they are eventually sent south they'll be here until December, or at the defenses of Washington until December. Then they'll come down here, and this is kind of their first taste of combat. For many of the men in these 120, 130 regiments in the Army of the Potomac, this is their first taste of combat. They will be in Norman Hall's 3rd Brigade, Oliver Howard's 2nd Division of Darius Couch's 2nd Corps. Early in the morning on December 11th, sorry, bombardment of Fredericksburg begins. And during that day, Union Army engineers are trying to build the pontoon bridges, and we talked a little bit about that earlier. And there was the Confederate sharpshooters that were really making that a tough, challenging task. When it became evident that it wasn't successful, there were about 300 men that were called upon to advance across the river in boats using poles. Most of them were veteran soldiers from Massachusetts and I believe the 7th Michigan. But there was a small squad of the 127th that were involved in that. They volunteered. They wanted to get that taste of action early and help in any way that they can, since they only had 9 months to make a name for themselves. So they actually volunteered, and a small squad of them did go across. And it was about 3 p.m. in the afternoon when they make their way across, and they are successful in driving the sharpshooters back. The rest of the regiment will join them the next day And by 11 p.m., they're actually going to be posted on Caroline Street, which is the second street off of the Rappahannock River that they had just crossed. And that's where they'll be posted on the night of the 11th into the 12th. And then on December 13th, we talk about this baptism of fire for a lot of these regiments so far that we've talked about, except for the reserves. But like the 114th, the 127th, eventually the 129th, this is their first taste of heavy combat for most of those regiments. Now on this Saturday, December 13th, 1862, General Joshua T. Owen, who will take command, they will actually be attached to his brigade at this point. He calls it a baptismal day in blood of the 127th Regiment. And at about 9 a.m., Owen paid an official visit to the regiment and complimented himself, finding a splendid body of men. So these are obviously very green troops. They're going to have very fresh-looking uniforms, but they look sharp. He made a short but spirited patriotic speech, declaring the 13th day of December would be a memorable day in American history. He cheered the men to stand firm and fight bravely in honor of the flag and in defense of the Union. I'm sure there are plenty of those type of spirited speeches going on at this time because I think everybody knew what was coming.
Right.
Colonel Jennings was acting as provost marshal since the day prior and had requested to be relieved, which was granted because he wanted to lead his men into this what might be this glorious moment. He led the regiment in a quick march out Hanover Street into Telegraph Road, leading directly to the face of the Confederate line here on Marye's Heights. And shortly before noon, General Owen rode to the regiment and said, "Colonel Jennings, your regiment is now wanted." And Jennings ordered his men to leave their knapsacks behind so they did not weigh them down because they knew that there was a heights that they were going to be going towards, and it was a long march, didn't need to exert any more energy than what was needed. The 127th passed through a horrific site toward a similar fate. So this is not the first attack on Marye's Heights that they're involved in, but they're passing by retreating troops that are wounded, and they just look terrible. And also, obviously, there's going to be bodies laying all through this area as well. And there was no time to think about what was happening around them. They were only focused on their task at hand. So they hurried on the outskirts of town. General Owen formed the regiment in the line of battle. They were on the left of the 106th Pennsylvania, and the command was given for forward, right shoulder shift, double quick march. And they make that hasty sprint towards this hill. They charged into the fray, and their unit history that was written later on gives a great summation of what they experienced, and I'll read that for you. Shoulder to shoulder, the gallant men quickly closed up the ranks as their comrades fell bleeding and dying. Here was heroism exemplified in the unflinching devotion to duty, braving inevitable death while making the memorable but desperate charge on up to within 75 yards of the enemy's line. The advance of those gallant men was the perfection of discipline and patriotism. They faced death like heroes. It is difficult to picture the thrilling scenes, and words to fail to adequately describe the fearful carnage and the dreadful slaughter in the superb charge on the slope of Marye's Heights. The officers who commanded, as well as the men, well knew that the charge was into the very jaws of death, yet they gallantly pressed forward, unmindful to anything but duty. On they rushed, line after line, and column after column, and the ground seemed to swallow up the brave men as they were ruthlessly shot down from the terrific fire of the enemy, who handled their cannon with skill and did most effective work at close range. But our brave boys stood up and gallantly advanced, only to be mowed down in death. Here was fought probably the hottest fight of the fiercest battles that ever raged. So definitely a very well written piece, maybe a little glorified, but definitely nonetheless, this is a part of the battle that a lot of these men will remember. And for the 127th, this is their only battle. This is their mark on the Civil War. After they're brought down here in December of 1862, they stay here till the end of their term. They are here during after the battle. They stay in Fredericksburg, and they continue and around it, and they will be involved in the Battle of Second Fredericksburg in May of 1863, which is something that's less forgotten because it's during the Chancellorsville campaign, and it's during the Battle of Chancellorsville that this is occurring.
Yep, and they actually, as I recall, get to help take this stone wall in the Marye's Heights in the Second Battle of Fredericksburg.
They do.
That's getting ahead of ourselves.
That's another live stream in itself. Coming back and taking a spot that they weren't able to first get in December of 1862. So now we're on to Sunday, December 14th, and the fighting has really ceased around the Fredericksburg. There was silence along the line. It was cold and foggy around Fredericksburg. There was a truce between the two sides so they could gather and bury their dead. Corporal Adam Carmody of Company E was severely wounded near the sunken road, and Company E dispatched men to search for his body, but were unable to locate him. So he's forever listed missing in action, and that's common for a lot of men.
Right.
Identifying the dead was difficult because Confederates had stripped the Union dead of clothing and other identifying articles. I imagine that's because of the cold weather that's happening here around. It was a cold winter that year, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it's chilly. This is why these armies don't like to fight in December.
Yes, or anything.
Not great.
Or anything up in January and February and even into March. A woman who lived near the sunken road reported, quote, "The evening after the battle, the field was blue with bodies, but the morning after the battle, the field was white," meaning all of the bodies had been stripped of their clothing. The 127th went into battle of Fredericksburg, novice soldiers, no combat experience at all. They had only been in the Army for a couple months at this point. But they returned to their camp as veterans, but with a great loss. They lost 257 men killed or wounded during their only major battle during their enlistment, which is quite a lot of men for one large battle. Skipping ahead here, the monument, which is directly behind the camera, it's in the cemetery, so we didn't want to go up there. We'll post a picture of that in the comments so you can see what the monument looks like. It's one of only 4 monuments in the cemetery, and it's the only one to an actual regiment. The other ones are like a 5th Corps, and there's a monument to Humphreys up there, but it's the only individual regimental monument. And it was dedicated in June of 1906. There were about 220 veterans and their guests in attendance when it was dedicated. Governor Samuel Pennypacker was governor of Pennsylvania at the time. He dedicated the monument and conveyed it over to the U.S. government, who was, it was given to General Ezra A. Carman, who is also another familiar name in, especially Antietam, if you're familiar with his writings. But cool little connection here before we kind of get to the end of this. Pennypacker served under Jennings in the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Militia, which, you know, I like to have the Gettysburg connections because that's something that people definitely know, as you know, as we do these other battles around Virginia and the Civil War.
Excellent. So, you know, that's a great kind of summation of their experience. And like you mentioned, you know, there are a lot of Pennsylvania regiments who were formed up in the late summer of 1862, or August, September 1862, where they have not yet had battlefield experience. Many of them miss out on Antietam. And so Fredericksburg is really going to be their first taste of battle. So 127th Pennsylvania gets that. 129th Pennsylvania, which is what the regiment I'm going to talk about in just a few minutes, they're going to experience that same sort of thing. It's going to be their real first taste as an organization, as a fighting regiment, to actually experience battle. I do want to get a little bit into the personal, because you mentioned that you had family that served in the 127th Pennsylvania. Yeah. Do you know anything about your uncle who, you said your uncle who's buried here?
Yes.
Do you have any kind of the personal story there? I think is interesting.
I do. So his brother, first off, is Albert Lentz. He is buried in Prospect Hill Cemetery. Kind of funny because there's Prospect Hill here at Fredericksburg. Prospect Hill Cemetery in York, Pennsylvania. According to the Find-A-Grave, his wife still had his uniform when she died in the 1920s, and I don't know if it stayed with the family or not, which is unfortunate.
Right.
But his brother Eli. So Albert was a corporal. Eli was a private. And they were in the same company. I imagine they were. He was by his bedside when he died. He died in, I want to say it was February or January 26th, I think is the date, 1863. They're on duty in Falmouth. That's where they go after the Battle of Fredericksburg. That's where they stay in winter camp, and then they're here. They pretty much stay here until their end of their enlistment. And as we already kind of talked about, they'll be back here in May of '63, right at the very end of their enlistment. But he died of what it was quoted as swelling of the brain. Not sure exactly what that was. Not sure what caused
put on my medical hat and say,
please tell me.
One of those things that could be associated with that is typhoid fever.
Okay.
Because of high fever, you can get the swelling of the brain. So take off my medical hat.
Yes. Medical museum
yeah,
extraordinaire.
Exactly. No, that's interesting. You know, again, kind of tying that into the bigger themes. Disease is the biggest killer of these Civil War soldiers.
Yeah.
By far, 2/3 of those that die during the conflict die as a result of disease, not necessarily of battle.
Now, for anybody who watched the Antietam live stream, I talked about the 130th. Their brother, Peter Lentz, was in the 130th. And then there was a fourth brother who served in the 87th Pennsylvania. Very storied family, the Lentzes. Their sister married my fourth great grandfather, George Washington Briggs, who was in the 2nd Pennsylvania Heavy Artillery. So very cool family history there.
All the family connections.
Yes, I have so many of them, and I could talk for days and days and days about them. But it's definitely one way to learn about history is learning about your family. I mean, it's an easy way to get involved in it, and I definitely highly suggest, if you can, to look into it, because it might be a way that you get into history or get somebody else you know into history.
Yeah, and we see so many comments through PennCivilWar, and just want to thank you all for engaging with our content.
Yes.
We really enjoy that, be able to have this two-way conversation about Pennsylvania's role in the Civil War, and we see a lot of those comments are about your family connections to the Civil War. So thank you for that. We really enjoy that. We want to hear about your connections to the conflict, why you're interested in it. So you can see, like, I have my connections, Kendrick has his. I feel like we all have these connections to the Civil War that make it important and special for us as we study it. So thank you for that. And if you do have any questions, we do have oftentimes get messages looking for more information. We really enjoy those because it gives us the chance to kind of share some of the knowledge that we all have. The four of us who are doing the project, myself, Kendrick, Rich, who's right behind the camera right now, and shout out to Cody back at Seminary Ridge Museum, if you're watching, who we were unfortunately not able to have here with us today. But we're just so thrilled to be able to pull this project together for you all. And we really hope you're enjoying these kinds of events and these live streams. So, well, Kendrick, do you have anything else for?
I don't. I do not.
All right,
that's
cool.
all I got for you.
Well, thank you so much. We are going to be bouncing back with another live stream in just a few minutes. We're going to kind of turn the camera around a little bit and talk about another one of these 9-month regiments that's going to serve here at Marye's Heights and experience their baptism by fire just down about 50 yards from the stone wall here at Marye's Heights. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll be back shortly.